Our next case, Loni, is so disturbing on so many levels. And the other thing that bugs me about this is there were plenty of people that I believe in powerful positions who could have put a stop or intervened and didn't. So this is what gets me about this case. And here's what's also interesting. Like our last case, this is about privilege, power, and money. No way around it. So prosecutors have released new information in court records that were filed in Manhattan federal court. 61-year-old Lawrence Ray is the father of a Sarah Lawrence college student. He was indicted on charges of allegedly manipulating, abusing, and extorting his daughter's friends and other victims as part of a wider scheme that netted him more than $1 million. And this happened over a decade, according to U.S. Attorney Jeffrey Berman. Now, here's what he allegedly did. Prosecutors say that Lawrence Ray forced some of his victims, so these are young college students, into prostitution by getting compromising information about them and then threatening to make that information public. So if they didn't do what he said, but that was only part of the manipulation. Prosecutors say that he treated these college students like sex slaves. Supposedly there are graphic videos that he shot on his cell phone with these girls in demeaning and compromising and humiliating positions. And that was part of the evidence that the prosecutors say they have. Now, this is supposedly how it started. And for me, this is beyond. All right. So his daughter's going to an excellent college. Sarah Lawrence is a premier college on the East Coast. He reportedly moves in to his daughter's college dorm room. This is a man, okay?
First of all, I don't get that right there. Let's just stop right there. Why did people think that it was okay for this man who had just gotten out of prison to move in and become essentially one of the roommates with his daughter and all of her roommates? I mean, and not just for a night. Like, he's not visiting and staying the night. He moves in. Didn't anyone have a problem with that? I mean, where were the college officials on that one?
Don't even get me started on that one, Loni, because the president of Sarah Lawrence actually made a statement and she said, you know, we're very surprised and shocked by this. She said, but we went back and we checked. No one complained. No one filed a report. No one said that there was a grown man in his 50s, you know, living with college students. And then she gave the excuse of, well, you know, it's kind of like a townhouse facility that the university runs. So probably no one would have noticed. Give me a break. Because if no one notices that there is a grown man living with girls in a dorm, then you got some serious security problems at Sarah Lawrence.
Yeah.
Shocking. Again, privilege. Privilege, look the other way. Shocking. All right. So he moves into his daughter's dorm room, and this is when he starts recruiting her classmates. What's interesting is in everything I've read, Loni, we don't have a lot of information about her. Was she victimized too? Was she just a pawn? Was she participating? She's not charged in any way, but I'm just very curious about the daughter.
Yeah. Well, from what I read about the history of the family and the relationship is, you know, early on, the father and mother were getting a divorce. They were having conflict. And she immediately sided with the father and was always standing up for the father, like his little soldier. And if he said anything bad about the mother, she agreed with it. I mean, she was, you know, sort of abusive to the mother along with the father. And that continued on even when he went to prison. She stuck up for him. She was telling all her roommates how amazing he was and bragging about all his connections, his political connections and his, you know, military mottos and, you know, all of this discipline that he had taught her. And then when he got out, you know, she'd made him into this sort of superhero and said, hey, he's going to come stay with us for a while because he doesn't have a place to go. And apparently they all said, okay. So she's not charged, but she was clearly, you know, sort of his cheerleader and adored him.
Yeah, the whole thing is really freaky. It's very disturbing. So apparently what he would then do is he would befriend her classmates, her friends, and he would begin isolating them and brainwashing them, according to prosecutors. They say it was all psychological manipulation. So he could gain control, but he apparently gained control through what they describe as lengthy therapy sessions. So he would force them to go, on and on about their deepest problems. And that's how he would get family secrets and secrets on them. And kind of, he pretended, part of the allegations are that he pretended to be like a therapist, a mental health expert. And in doing so, these sessions would go on for hours and they were grueling, but that increased his ability to control them and also to mine them for information. The prosecutors describe it as these girls being under his spell. Those are the words they used.
Well, and I think, the way they described when we first got there, he was kind of like the den father, right? He would cook for them. He would set up movie nights. He would, set up these activities and they loved it. Remember, these are college kids who are away from home, maybe for the first time, feeling a little lonely. And then they'd have these marathon, sessions after they watched a movie. They're hanging out in the living room together and they just start talking about personal things. And one girl said she just had a really horrible breakup. And he says, I can help you with that. Let's have some therapy sessions. She's like, okay. And apparently he can be very charming. And then there was another young man and he was, struggling with his sexuality and wondering, what to do. And I can help you with that. So they go into it thinking it's all normal. And this adult figure who apparently has this pedigreed background and knows all of these famous people and, has been relied on by, politicians and law enforcement people have, relied on him and his judgment. And they're like, oh, okay, well, he's going to help me with some therapy. And then he's grooming them, right? It's like any, predator. He's grooming them to look at him as a father figure and to think everything's okay. And then by the time he gets to the point where he's saying, I want you two to have sex together and I'm going to watch you and critique you, they go along with it because they think it's part of their therapy, right?
Oh, and they're still so young at this age.
So young.
So young at this age. Yeah. Their brains haven't even finished forming yet.
Right.
So what ends up happening is that some of these students or his victims or however you want to describe them attempt suicide and then they require hospitalization. This is the new information that's coming out of the court record right now. And they say that, so here's this guy who was present before they were suicidal. Then the prosecutors are wondering whether he planted a seed that made them vulnerable and whether or not he may have even suggested suicide. All this is going to have to be determined in a court of law. But these are all of the things that are being investigated as part of this case. And then after the suicide attempt, these young people would need to be hospitalized. This guy would show up at the hospital and insert himself into their recovery as part of being a therapist or as part of their treatment. And the fact that anyone at any hospital permitted this to go on. So here we have the guy moving into Sarah Lawrence. Should never have happened. Now we have the guy inserting himself while they're hospitalized and then post-recovery. I'm like, is nobody minding the store here? That this guy's just maneuvering through all of this?
Yeah, and some of the parents, there were a couple of parents amongst these victims who were very active trying to save their children. They knew something was going on. And some of them said when they went to the hospital after this suicide attempt, he was there and he would somehow wedge in between them and keep them from seeing or talking to their child. The lengths that he went to were so extreme. And like you said, there were other people around. There's the hospital administrator. Why didn't they speak up? Some of these parents went to one of the administrators at the college and said something. And essentially the response was, well, they're over 18. There's nothing we can do. They're making their own choices. So the parents, were banging their heads against a wall trying to do something and no one was listening.
It's so disturbing, especially when you can see it in retrospect, because then you can really get the context of it. As part of this charade, prosecutors say that Lawrence Ray allegedly went so far as to diagnose some of the victims and told them, now imagine you're a young person being told this, that they had borderline personality disorder. How damaging is this when you're already fragile? Plus now with the suicide attempts, plus the recovery. And now they're holding on to this guy because they think they need him. And the parents are worried because their children are in crisis. It's an awful, awful thing that these young people have been put through. Now, to add to the creepy factor, okay, He's creepy dad without question, right? No matter what. Even if the man's not convicted of anything, he's creepy dad. Okay?
Yeah.
So here's the thing about him. He has a lot of powerful friends. According to the Daily News, he was the best man at the wedding of the former New York City Police Commissioner, Bernie Kerik. Okay? That's not just anyone, your best man, the best man to the police commissioner. So he had entree, access to all of the New York City political leaders. The New York Times has claimed that he may have organized crime connections. We have no idea if that's true. He clearly was politically connected. Now, the Bernie Kerik thing is just a little bit complicated, and I want to give everybody some context. This happened, so in 2010, which is about the time that dad moves in to Sarah Lawrence, is when Bernie Kerik pleaded guilty to tax fraud and ends up serving 3 years, but he ends up getting pardoned by President Trump. So keep in mind that creepy daddy moves in when his buddy Bernie is having some serious legal issues of his own, and daddy has just been released from prison for his own problems. Okay?
Well, yes. And also there are some reports, some allegations that the reason Bernie had all of those, I mean, he was way at the top, right, politically and career-wise, and he had a massive fall. And some people blame that on creepy daddy. They say that they had a falling out, right? They were very close. And then when Lawrence was having some legal issues of his own, he turned to Bernie and said, hey, help me out here. You know, you've got all the connections, help me out. And he said, I'm sorry, I can't. You know, now I'm hobnobbing with the president or whoever, I can't. And so Larry was so mad that then he was the one who brought forth stuff that ended up toppling Bernie from his high pedestal all the way to the point where he was in prison. And they said at that point, this is all allegations, but they said that, something sort of snapped in Larry, and he went from being, kind of like this guy who was connected to everybody and sort of a manipulator, charmer. They never knew if it was all true or not, to becoming more vengeful and sort of devious. And all of a sudden, all of his energy turned into, focused on these students at Sarah Lawrence, sadly.
And think about it. Things are not going well in your life. All of a sudden, you thought you were a powerful guy and maybe you're not. But in this tiny little world at Sarah Lawrence, you're king. You're the kingmaker, right?
Yeah.
So if you live off of that vibe of being powerful and having people turn to you, then he replicated that, but with the saddest, most vulnerable people around. These aren't politicians. These aren't alleged criminals. These aren't people with money. These are kids.
Yeah. Yeah. But not only was he controlling them, he was also getting money from them. He was also having sex with them. So he was the king of his little kingdom right there and getting everything that he wanted.
Yeah. Working them as prostitutes. So yeah, he needed a supply of money. So allegedly that was part of this scheme because he's also charged with racketeering. Now, none of this would have really been investigated unless it had become public. Again, another theme we're seeing. Sometimes to get justice, you got to go public because the authorities may not be able to help you, especially if you're at the wedding of the authorities. It's not going to happen. So a magazine article is done. And in this magazine article from New York Magazine titled The Stolen Kids of Sarah Lawrence, that's when the journalist kind of put it all out there. And that's when all of a sudden creepy dad is revealed. And then that leads to the snowball effect of all that's happened since then. So, I can't even imagine what people must have been thinking at that time as they're reading this article and saying, and the police haven't done anything, right?
Yeah. And it's an example that we're seeing more and more of, these really strange cases being broken by journalists, right? In print somewhere. So you can read it. They can go into a lot of detail. That article was like 28 pages and it was fascinating reading. I mean, they had talked to the different victims and people and Lawrence's background and so they can go into so much detail. And then when you're right, you get to the end and you're like, wait a minute, nobody's looked into this. It's the same thing with, Rowan.
Oh, Rowan Farrow, who brought down Harvey Weinstein.
Yeah,
Yes.
stuff that's been talked about, but law enforcement for whatever reason really isn't getting on it. And then all of a sudden you have it all laid out for everyone to see, and there's this public outcry, and law enforcement goes, "Oh my goodness, we need to do something." And they said that the investigation they did was instigated by that article on this case.
Absolutely. How could you look away? I mean, the authorities have been shamed into and being forced into investigating. You can't look away from these allegations. So there was a woman, she's profiled in the article, and also she becomes an important part of this case, but she goes allegedly from going from victim to now possibly being a co-defendant in the case. So in 2013, after graduating, one of the women spent time with Lawrence in North Carolina and New York, houses in Piscataway, and she lived with yet another woman. All of this according to New York Magazine. All right. So in the original indictment, which was released in February of 2020, Lawrence was the sole defendant at the time, saying that he was the one who had gained control and did all the therapy sessions. All right. Now, the new indictment that was unsealed in January of 2021, just a few months ago, for the first time named this woman, Isabella Pollock. Now, here's what's interesting. She went from being a victim, as I said, to now being a co-defendant with Lawrence. Apparently, he recruited her to join in the criminal scheme. Originally, the New York Times said Isabella was indeed one of the exploited students. So what's unclear is at what point did things change, according to the New York Times. So she's also facing charges of racketeering, extortion, sex trafficking, and because this case isn't complicated enough, they're in court, they've been arguing, is Isabella competent enough to stand trial? And is she still under the influence of this guy? So the judge has ordered a competency evaluation to figure out what's going on with Isabella. But it doesn't end there. So you got Isabella, who now everyone's trying to figure out what side is she on, victim, co-defendant, what are you going to do with her? Mm-hmm. But wait. Then there are still women who he apparently has under his spell, and that prosecutors didn't want him released because they were afraid that he could still control them. Mm-hmm. Okay, now those women, the latest allegations, this is in the New York Times, this is unbelievable. So he's not supposed to have contact with those other women who would be potentially victims and witnesses, correct, against him? Mm-hmm. So he allegedly has been sending secret messages through his own father to get to them. So prosecutors are outraged that even from behind bars, he's still manipulating them. Yeah. And naturally, prosecutors are worried about their case because if they are going to refute any of the charges and say, no, I wanted to do that. Like, what does that do to the case, Loni?
Yeah. I mean, if you have the victims on the stand saying, I don't know why you're charging this man. He's the best thing that ever happened in my life. He saved me at a time when I needed him. It makes it very hard for a jury, right? To sit there. And some of these students were Harvard graduate, doctor, Columbia graduate. I mean, they're smart people that got caught up in this. And so it would be very confusing to a jury. Now, going back to Isabella for a moment, she was the one who, in the New York Magazine article, was young, had just gotten through a very bad breakup when Lawrence moved into their apartment and said, I can help you. And then apparently they started a relationship together, and they've been together for years. And in March, right after they, arrested Lawrence and indicted him, the prosecutors were saying, like you said, she's one of the victims. She's been exploited. She's been abused all of this time. And even now they're saying, is she competent enough to stand trial? Does she understand what's going on? But then they're going to charge her as a aider and abetter, a co-conspirator. And this is really murky ground. This is similar to the Keith Rainier. Remember his sex cult, NXIVM? And they charged 5 of the women there also as his co-conspirators. At what point does a victim who's supposedly been brainwashed and had all these horrible things done to them switch over to where they're, helping? And apparently there's charge that, she helped him collect the money that, he was making the other people pay him. But she doing that because she's still under his influence, right? Or is she doing it because she knows, really, does she have a full awareness of what she's doing? And in these federal prosecutions, sometimes the prosecutors will charge someone like this in the hopes that they will cooperate, right? That they will give testimony for the prosecution. Now they have this sort of hammer hanging over their head. We have these charges against you. You need to now start helping us, work with us, and cooperate. So that might be the reason why they charged her. I don't know, but it's a very murky situation as far as, when do you decide that victim has crossed the line now and become a co-conspirator? When she's been in this very strange relationship with this man the entire time that started under really, really bad circumstances.
Oh my goodness. It's such an unbelievable case. And I say this an awful lot when we have these cases of like cults and people brainwashing. It always happens among the rich and the educated, because honestly, poor people don't have time for this nonsense, right? You don't have time and you don't have the money for all this, for these shenanigans.
Yeah.
And like, look at this. Look at what has transpired here. This is insane. And I'm fascinated. This is like, get the popcorn out. I can't get enough of this case. So Lawrence Ray and Isabella Pollock have pleaded not guilty, and trial is set to begin on September 20th. Get your popcorn.